A black boy takes a final selfie during a class trip and then vanishes. Years later, his camera is found deep in the woods. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Williams stretched his arm out in front of him, angling his phone to capture the perfect shot, his grinning face framed by the vibrant Appalachian peaks behind him. The bright red of his jacket popped against the sprawling canvas of autumn foliage. He studied the photo for a moment, satisfied with how the golden afternoon light caught the ridgelines in the distance. "Come on, Williams. You'll have plenty of time for selfies when we reach the lookout," Mr. Thompson called from up ahead, where the rest of the 10th grade class was already rounding a bend in the trail. "1 minute," Marcus called back, quickly pocketing his phone. Before rejoining the group, he paused at a peculiar rock formation just off the trail, a series of stones stacked in what seemed too deliberate a pattern to be natural. He pulled out his camera again, the professional one his father had given him before he died, and snapped several quick photographs, adjusting the focus to capture the strange alignment. The formation reminded him of something he'd read about ancient trail markers. He stepped closer, squinting at what appeared to be faint carvings on the largest stone. The markings were weathered, barely visible, yet definitely man-made. "Marcus, let's go!" The voice of his science teacher, Dr. Green, echoed through the trees. "Coming!" he called back, reluctantly turning away. As he jogged to catch up with his classmates, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He glanced back at the stone formation, but saw nothing unusual, just shadows stretching longer as the afternoon progressed. By the time Marcus reached the bend in the trail, the rest of the group had already disappeared from view. He picked up his pace, red jacket flashing between the trees as he moved swiftly along the path. 31, 32. Mr. Thompson's voice grew increasingly tense as he counted heads at the designated meeting point, a clearing with a spectacular view of the valley below. 33. Wait. He consulted his clipboard, then counted again. "We're missing someone." Dr. Green stepped forward, scanning the assembled students with growing concern. "Who's not here?" A murmur rippled through the group as students looked around. "Marcus," a girl with braided hair said. "I don't see Marcus." Dr. Green's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Has anyone seen Marcus Williams in the last 30 minutes? A chorus of negatives and headshakes answered him. "He was taking photos back at that weird rock pile," someone offered. "That was almost an hour ago," Mr. Thompson said, checking his watch. The afternoon light was already beginning to fade, the October sky darkening earlier than it would have just a few weeks before. Dr. Green pulled out his phone. "I'll try calling him." The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. "Marcus, this is Dr. Green. Please call back immediately and let us know where you are." Mr. Thompson was already organizing the other teachers and chaperones. "We need to start looking now, before it gets any darker." Within minutes, the peaceful field trip had transformed into a chaotic search operation. Teachers and the more responsible older students spread out along the trail, calling Marcus's name. Their voices echoed through the increasingly shadowy forest, growing more urgent as the minutes ticked by. "Marcus! Marcus Williams! Marcus!" The cries bounced off rock faces and faded into the darkening woods without response. Sheriff Dawson arrived at the makeshift command center, a ranger station at the trailhead. Just as the sky was turning a deep indigo, he found Dr. Green attempting another call to Marcus's phone, his face etched with tension in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Still nothing?" the sheriff asked, hanging his wide-brimmed hat on a hook by the door. "Straight to voicemail now," Dr. Green said. "Battery might be dead." The sheriff nodded, unsurprised. "What about the tracking app you mentioned?" "Last ping shows him near a rock formation about 2 miles back from the meeting point." Dr. Green pulled up a map on his tablet. "Here." but we've already checked that area. No sign of him." Sheriff Dawson studied the map, his weathered face betraying little emotion. He'd been through this before. "Any chance he went off trail?" "Marcus isn't the type," Dr. Green insisted. "He's cautious, responsible." "They all are until they're not," the sheriff said quietly. "City kids underestimate these mountains every time." He turned as the door opened, letting in a blast of cool air and a woman clutching the hand of a young boy. Renee Williams's eyes darted frantically around the room until they landed on the sheriff. Her son, Tyler, no more than 10 years old, pressed against her side, his small face tight with worry. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where's Marcus?" Dr. Green stepped forward. "Ms. Williams, we're doing everything. You were supposed to watch them." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and painful. Sheriff Dawson intervened smoothly. "Ms. Williams, I'm Sheriff Dawson. We have search teams on the mountain right now and more on the way. I need to ask you some questions that might help us find your son." Renee nodded stiffly, her free hand nervously twisting the strap of her purse. "We understand Marcus was wearing a red jacket today?" "Yes," her voice cracked slightly. "Bright red, almost new. It was the last gift his father gave him before he passed away. He wears it all the time." The sheriff nodded, making a note. "That's good. Makes him easier to spot. Any medical conditions we should know about? Medications?" "No. He's healthy, athletic." Renee's composure was slipping. "He wouldn't just wander off. Something's happened to him." Tyler looked up at his mother, then at the sheriff. "Marcus knows how to find north using stars," he offered quietly. "He taught me." Sheriff Dawson smiled at the boy. "That's good information, son." He turned to his deputy. "Get the dog teams up here now, and call in for the helicopter with thermal imaging." Within an hour, the search had expanded dramatically. Volunteers from neighboring towns joined forest rangers and police officers, forming search parties that combed the trails with flashlights cutting through the darkness. Search dogs sniffed at Marcus's backpack, which had been left on the bus, then set off into the forest, handlers struggling to keep pace. At midnight, the first troubling discovery was made. The dogs had followed Marcus's scent to an unusual fork in the trail, one path clearly marked, the other barely visible. More animal track than human path. There, the scent trail became confused, circling before heading off on the less traveled route. By 2 a.m., a volunteer found disturbing signs near a steep section of the unmarked path, drag marks on stone, as if something, or someone, had been pulled across the rough surface. Nearby, a small droplet of what appeared to be blood was found on a leaf. A quick field test confirmed it was human blood, though the amount was minimal. The helicopter arrived before dawn, its powerful searchlight sweeping across the canopy. The thermal imaging operator reported a brief heat signature moving between trees at one point, but when they circled back, there was nothing but darkness. By the third day, hope was fading. Exhausted search teams had covered miles of terrain. The only significant discovery was Marcus's backpack, found partially burned near a small clearing 7 miles from where he was last seen. Nearby, a strange symbol had been carved into a tree, 3 intersecting lines with what appeared to be an eye in the center. None of the local rangers recognized it from known trail markings or indigenous symbols. Renee had barely slept, spending every moment at the command center when not joining search parties. Tyler remained glued to her side, his young face becoming increasingly hollow as the days passed. When Sheriff Dawson gathered the team leaders for a morning briefing, Renee sensed the shift in mood before any words were spoken. She approached the sheriff as the group dispersed, his avoided gaze confirming her fears. "You're giving up," she said, the words flat. "Ms. Williams, we're not giving up," he began carefully. But with the weather changing, "No!" The word exploded from her. She grabbed his shirt, surprising herself and him with the sudden physical contact. "You can't stop looking," He's out there. My son is out there." The sheriff gently removed her hands but didn't step back. "We'll keep searching, but we need to scale back. We've had teams on the mountain for 72 hours straight. Some of these folks haven't slept in days." Renee's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her body. "Please," she whispered, "please don't stop." That night, contrary to all forecasts, the first snow of autumn began to fall, 6 weeks earlier than normal. Renee stood at the window of the command center, watching white flakes swirl in the darkness, covering the ground in a thin blanket that would erase whatever traces of Marcus might still remain on the mountain. Behind her, she heard Sheriff Dawson speaking quietly into his radio, the words cutting through her like a knife. "We're reclassifying the Williams case from missing person to possible abduction. All teams be advised." While the final search teams trudged back through the unexpected snowfall, miles away in a remote section of the forest, a forest ranger surveying for storm damage discovered a torn red jacket caught high in the branches of a tree, far above what any person could possibly have reached. Ranger James Harrington stared at the red jacket in his hands, still preserved in an evidence bag, though forgotten by most. The fabric was weathered now, with tears along the sleeve and a dark stain that tests had confirmed was blood. 5 years had passed since he'd found it caught impossibly high in the branches, miles from where the search teams had concentrated their efforts. "Another dead end," he muttered, placing the jacket back into the cardboard box of unsolved evidence. His small office at the Eastern Ranger Station had become a repository for the region's mysteries: hikers who veered off trail and were never seen again, campers who vanished from locked tents, and the Williams boy, whose disappearance had haunted James more than most. The ranger closed the box and slid it back onto the shelf. "Some cases stayed with you, wormed their way under your skin. This was one of them. A 15-year-old boy doesn't just evaporate from a supervised school trip, not without leaving more traces than a burned backpack and a jacket that appeared to have been thrown into a tree." His radio crackled, calling him to a routine patrol. With a sigh, James grabbed his hat and stepped into the crisp autumn air, so similar to the day Marcus Williams had gone missing. Renee Williams balanced precariously at the top of an aluminum ladder, stapling a fresh, still missing poster over a concert advertisement on the community bulletin board. The same smiling face that had looked out from these posters for 5 years, Marcus in his red jacket, his expression frozen in perpetual youth while the world aged around him. "Ma'am, you can't put those up here," a store owner called from his doorway. "I've told you before." "5 minutes," Renee replied without looking down, her voice flat from years of repeating the same conversations. "It'll take you 5 minutes to tear it down after I leave. Just give me that much." She descended the ladder, her movements mechanical after years of practice. The weekly ritual, printing new posters, replacing the weathered ones around town, continuing the search that everyone else had abandoned. Her car trunk was filled with stacks of them, Marcus's face multiplied 100 times over. At 43, Renee looked a decade older, the weight of her missing son etched into the lines around her eyes. She folded the ladder and loaded it into her car, checking her watch. Tyler would be home from school soon. In their modest apartment on the east side of town, Tyler Williams sat cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by anthropology textbooks far beyond the reading level of most 15-year-olds. The walls around him told the story of his obsession. Maps of the Appalachian Mountains covered in pins and notes, newspaper clippings about disappearances dating back a century, and photographs of strange symbols found carved into trees throughout the region. A red string connected various points on the largest map, forming a pattern that almost made sense, almost revealed something significant about his brother's disappearance. Almost, but not quite. Tyler adjusted his glasses and returned to the heavy tome on indigenous symbol systems. He'd taught himself to read academic texts by necessity, driven by the certainty that somewhere in these patterns lay the key to finding Marcus. While other kids his age were at football games or hanging out at the mall, Tyler was building a database of disappearances, cataloging symbols, teaching himself survivalist techniques. The apartment door opened and closed. "I'm home," his mother called, her voice carrying the same exhaustion it always did after poster day. "In my room," Tyler replied, not looking up from his book. Renee appeared in his doorway, taking in the familiar scene with resignation. "Any homework today?" "Finished it at lunch." Tyler finally glanced up. "How many posters did you put up?" 23. The hardware store finally banned me for good." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Want a sandwich?" Before Tyler could answer, the phone rang. They both froze, exchanging a look. Few people called their landline anymore, except those responding to the reward information printed on the posters. Renee moved quickly to the kitchen, snatching up the receiver. "Hello, yes, this is she." Tyler followed, watching his mother's face cycle through the familiar emotions: hope, suspicion, disappointment, and finally, anger. "No, I will not send money in advance," she snapped. "If you actually saw my son, you can meet me at the police station and tell them exactly where." She slammed the phone down, her hands shaking. "Another one. Says he saw Marcus at a gas station in Kentucky." Tyler leaned against the doorframe. "That's the third this month." Renee sank into a kitchen chair. "I've spent nearly everything, Tyler. Your college fund, the insurance money from your dad, all of it on private investigators and following up leads that go nowhere." "We'll find him," Tyler said, with the certainty of someone who had built his entire identity around a single purpose. "I'm getting closer." Ranger James Harrington hiked along the eastern ridge, checking trail markers and clearing fallen branches. It was routine work that allowed his mind to wander. 20 years in the military, followed by 10, as a park ranger, had given him an intuitive understanding of these mountains. They held secrets, patterns that most visitors missed. Something glinted in the underbrush 30 yards off trail. Probably just trash from careless hikers, but James was thorough by nature. He made his way down the slope, using his walking stick for balance on the loose soil. What he found wasn't typical trail litter. Half buried in 5 years of accumulated dirt and leaves was a camera. Not a cheap disposable, but a serious digital SLR with a cracked display and a lens that had been twisted at an unnatural angle. The device was weather-beaten, its once black body now gray and brittle from exposure. James almost tossed it into his trash bag, then hesitated. Something nagged at him. An instinct honed by years of noticing details others missed. This was nearly 30 kilometers from where Marcus Williams was last seen, far beyond the original search perimeter. Instead of discarding it, James carefully placed the camera in an evidence bag and sealed it. Probably nothing, he told himself. Just another piece of lost property that would sit in the ranger station's lost and found box until it was eventually thrown away. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something significant, something that belonged in the cardboard box of unsolved mysteries, rather than the trash. "You're sure it's his?" Renee's voice trembled as she stared at the damaged camera lying on the sterile table of the forensics lab. "The serial number matches the one reported in your son's belongings," the technician confirmed. "We've managed to recover the memory card data, though some files were corrupted by moisture damage." Sheriff Miller, who had replaced Dawson 3 years prior, stood in the corner, arms crossed. "Ms. Williams, I want to manage your expectations. Even if there are photos on this device, they may not tell us anything new." Renee ignored him, focusing on the technician. "Can we see them now?" The young woman nodded, turning her computer monitor so they could all view it. "There are 67 images recovered. I'll start from the most recent." The first image that appeared was blurry, chaotic, a smear of green and brown, as if the camera had been in motion when the shutter triggered. The next was similar, but with a dark shadow cutting across one corner. "These last few seem to be taken during some kind of struggle or fall," the technician explained, clicking through several more blurred images. Then a clear photo appeared, Marcus's smiling face in his red jacket, the Appalachian peaks visible behind him. The same image that had been reproduced on countless posters. "That's the last known photo of him," Renee whispered, reaching out to touch the screen before catching herself. The technician continued backward through the timeline. Most were typical vacation shots, scenic vistas, interesting rock formations, a few group photos with classmates. Then the sequence changed. "Wait, go back," Tyler said suddenly, leaning forward. "That one." The technician returned to a photo of what appeared to be strange markings carved into a tree trunk. The image was well composed, deliberately focused on the symbol, 3 intersecting lines with what looked like an eye in the center. "That's the same symbol they found near his backpack," Tyler said, excitement building in his voice. "And look at the metadata. This was taken less than 20 minutes before his last selfie." The technician checked the file information. He took quite a few photos of different markings. She clicked through several more images showing similar carvings on trees and rocks. The final recovered images revealed something unexpected: a crude shelter constructed of branches and bark, with more of the strange symbols carved into surrounding trees. The metadata confirmed these were taken the day of Marcus's disappearance. "Where exactly was this camera found?" Renee demanded, turning to James, who had been silently observing. "Eastern Ridge, about 30 kilometers from the original search area," he answered. "In a ravine that tourists rarely visit." 5 years, Renee said bitterly. 5 years? And you're telling me his camera was miles from where you were searching? What else did you miss?" Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "Ms. Williams, the original search was thorough based on the information available at the time." "These symbols," Tyler interrupted, pointing at the screen. "They match patterns from undocumented tribal markings. Look how some of them are connected in sequence, like..." He hesitated. "Like directions." Sheriff Miller sighed. "Tyler, I know you've been studying this stuff, but we need to leave the interpretation to experts." "What experts?" Tyler challenged. "The same ones who couldn't find my brother 30 kilometers from where he was last seen." Later that evening, James sat alone in his cabin reviewing historical records of disappearances in the region. What had begun as professional curiosity had gradually evolved into a private investigation conducted in the margins of his official duties. The pattern was disturbing. Every generation, at least one person vanished in roughly the same coordinates. As he updated his database with the newfound information about Marcus's camera, another pattern emerged. Most of the missing were creatively inclined: photographers, artists, musicians, people who documented the world around them. James's phone buzzed with a text message from a contact at the Historical Society. "Found something you should see. Old cameras in storage, one from 1978, same area. Call me." Against direct orders from Sheriff Miller to "let sleeping dogs lie," James made a decision. The next morning, he drove to the Williams residence and invited Renee and Tyler to accompany him to the exact location where he had found the camera. The mother and son exchanged a look before Renee replied, "When do we leave?" Dark clouds gathered as the trio hiked along the eastern ridge. The forecast had predicted clear skies, but mountain weather was notoriously unpredictable. James led them carefully along the unmarked path, noticing how Tyler's eyes constantly scanned the trees for symbols. "It was right around here," James said, as they reached a steep ravine. "Caught in some underbrush about halfway down." Before they could investigate further, a sudden crack of thunder signaled the arrival of an unexpected storm. Fat raindrops began to fall as the sky darkened ominously. "We need to find shelter," James called over the rising wind. "There's a rock overhang about a quarter-mile ahead." They hurried along the ridge as the storm intensified, finally reaching the natural shelter formed by a jutting rock face. As they huddled beneath it, catching their breath, Tyler noticed something wedged in a crevice near the ground. "Look at this," he called, carefully extracting the object. In his hands was an old camera, a Polaroid from the late 1970s, its plastic housing cracked in exactly the same pattern as Marcus's digital camera. "That's impossible," Renee whispered, reaching out to touch the vintage device. When they attempted to leave the forest after the storm passed, their navigation devices failed mysteriously. The GPS on James's professional equipment showed them jumping locations. The compass spun erratically, and their cell phones showed no signal. As they paused to get their bearings, Tyler spotted a figure in the distance, a flash of red moving between the trees. "There!" he shouted, pointing frantically. "Someone in a red jacket!" Without hesitation, Tyler bolted toward the figure. James lunged after him, catching the boy's arm in a firm grip. "Let me go!" Tyler struggled against the ranger's hold. It was him. It was Marcus's jacket. As Tyler enlarged the image on his computer, he pointed to a distant figure between the trees, wearing something red, and whispered with a choked voice. "That's Marcus. I'm sure of it. And this photo was taken just 3 months ago." Tyler's hand trembled as he pointed at the screen, the small figure in red barely visible against the dark trees. "Look at the timestamp," he insisted. "This was taken by a trail camera only 3 months ago." Renee leaned closer, her breath catching. The figure was distant, blurred, but the bright red color was unmistakable against the forest backdrop. After 5 years of false hopes and dead ends, she'd learned to guard her heart. But this was different. The location, the camera, the symbols, too many connections to dismiss. "We need to go back there," she said, her voice suddenly firm. "Not just to where you found the camera, but further in." James rubbed his weathered face, conflict evident in his eyes. "Sheriff Miller directly ordered me to drop this. Said the department can't waste resources chasing ghosts." "Then we'll go without them," Tyler said, already pulling maps from his wall display. "I've been studying these mountains for years. We don't need permission." Renee nodded, a fire rekindled behind her eyes. "What do we need to prepare?" James watched the determination spreading between mother and son, remembering the military principle that had guided much of his life. Leave no man behind. With a deep sigh that was half resignation and half resolve, he pulled out his own topographical map of the region. "If we're doing this," he said, spreading the map across Tyler's desk, "we're doing it right, and we're not telling a soul." 3 days later, under the guise of a weekend camping trip, the trio met at a rarely used trailhead far from regular hiking paths. James arrived in his personal vehicle rather than his ranger truck, carrying a backpack that contained equipment not officially signed out from the station. "Here's what we know," he said, kneeling to mark their map with a red pencil. "Marcus disappeared here near Bear Rock Junction. His camera was found here, nearly 30 kilometers east. If we follow these coordinates from the metadata in the recovered photos, we should end up somewhere in this region," Tyler finished, pointing to an area with few official trails. "I've compared the symbols from Marcus's photos with historical records. They're similar to marking systems used by early settlers who learned them from indigenous guides, but with subtle differences." Renee checked her own pack one final time. Water purification tablets, first aid supplies, 3 days of food, extra layers of clothing. A lifetime ago, before Marcus disappeared, such preparation would have seemed excessive. Now it felt barely adequate. "Sheriff Miller called me yesterday," she said quietly. "Warned me that if we trespassed on federal land without permits, he'd press charges. Said he didn't want another tragedy on his watch." James nodded grimly. "He called me, too. Threatened my pension." "Are we still going?" Tyler asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. James shouldered his pack. "Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Let's move, while we've still got daylight." The first day's hike followed established trails, though James deliberately chose less popular routes. By nightfall, they'd covered 12 miles of increasingly difficult terrain, setting up camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. As they ate a simple dinner of trail rations, Tyler pulled out a small notebook filled with carefully copied symbols. "I think they're directional markers," he explained, showing James and his mother. "See how some elements repeat but change orientation? It's like they're pointing the way, but only if you understand the code." "And you understand it?" James asked, examining the precise drawings. Tyler hesitated. "Not completely, but I recognize patterns. These 3 connected lines always appear near water sources. This spiral marking seems to indicate dangerous terrain. And this one..." He pointed to the eye-like symbol that had been found near Marcus's backpack. "This one is the most common in the photos, and always at what seems to be a decision point on the trail." "Like it's watching," Renee murmured, wrapping her jacket tighter against the evening chill. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. James was on his feet instantly, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the trees, revealing nothing but shadows and swaying branches. "Probably just a deer," he said, though his posture remained alert. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow we leave the marked trails." Dawn broke with a heavy mist that clung to the forest floor. After a brief breakfast, they continued eastward, now following only the coordinates James had extracted from the photo metadata and the symbols Tyler identified carved in occasional trees and rocks. The second day proved more challenging than the first. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, with steep ravines and dense underbrush slowing their progress. By mid-afternoon, James had noticed something concerning. "We're being watched," he said quietly as they paused to refill water bottles at a small stream. "Don't look around suddenly, but someone's been paralleling our route for at least 3 hours." "Rangers?" Renee asked, trying to maintain a casual posture while her heart raced. James shook his head slightly. "Too stealthy. Rangers would have approached us directly about being off trail." Tyler, crouched by the water, spotted another symbol carved into a rock, half submerged in the stream. "Look at this one," he said, carefully tracing the marking with his finger. "It's fresh. The cut is still clean, not weathered like the others." James examined the symbol. "How recent?" "Days, not years," Tyler concluded. "Someone is still using this system." They made camp that night in a less ideal location, a small space between boulders that offered better protection from unknown observers. James insisted they keep the fire small and set up a rotation of watch shifts. During the midnight hour, while James and Renee slept, Tyler kept vigil. The forest had fallen into that peculiar silence that seems both peaceful and expectant. As he scanned the darkness beyond their camp, he noticed a faint light moving between distant trees, not the white beam of a flashlight, but a softer amber glow, like a candle protected from the wind. He watched, motionless, as the light weaved through the forest, never approaching directly, but seeming to circle their position. When he woke James for the next watch, the ranger's expression grew serious at the description. "We're not alone out here," was all he said. The third day brought them to a series of unusual rock formations, unlike anything in the documented trails. James checked and rechecked their position against his maps. "We're entering an area with minimal surveying," he admitted. "The Forest Service maintains fire monitoring, but detailed topographical mapping has never been a priority here." As they navigated the increasingly maze-like terrain, their electronic equipment began to malfunction. First, James's GPS device started showing impossible coordinates, jumping miles in random directions. Then their compasses began to spin erratically, the needles swinging wildly before settling in contradictory directions. "It's got to be some kind of mineral deposit affecting the magnetism," James suggested, though he sounded uncertain. "Iron ore, maybe." Tyler shook his head. "It's not natural. Look at the pattern of interference. It increases as we get closer to these symbols." The teen pointed to yet another tree with carvings, these more elaborate than previous markings. As they studied the symbols, James's military-trained senses alerted him to subtle signs of surveillance. "We're being herded," he said softly. "These markers, the electronic interference, someone's directing our path." Renee clutched the strap of her backpack tighter. Toward what? The answer came sooner than expected. As they made their way through a narrow passage between towering rocks, Tyler spotted something on the ground. A thin wire running across the path at ankle height. "Wait!" he called out, just as James was about to step forward. "It's a tripwire." James crouched to examine the crude but effective alarm system. Not designed to hurt, just to alert someone of our presence. Tyler carefully stepped over the wire, then helped his mother across. Once on the other side, he noticed more surveillance mechanisms. Pebbles balanced on leaves that would rattle if disturbed, branches positioned to snap loudly if moved. "Someone's serious about their privacy," James observed, dismantling a few of the alarms as they progressed. By late afternoon, they reached a steep incline that appeared to dead end at a wall of rock and dense vegetation. Tyler studied the area, then pointed to a barely visible path winding between boulders. "There. See how the moss is slightly compressed? Someone uses this route regularly." James nodded approvingly. "Good eye, kid." As they began ascending the hidden path, the setting sun cast long shadows across the forest. The temperature dropped rapidly, and clouds gathered overhead, suggesting rain before morning. "We should make camp soon," Renee suggested. "Continue in daylight." James shook his head. "We're too exposed here. Let's find better shelter first." They pressed on as darkness fell, navigating by flashlight up the increasingly steep path. Without warning, the beam of James's light caught movement ahead, a flash of red disappearing behind a large boulder. "There," Renee gasped. "I saw it too." Tyler was already running, scrambling up the rocky incline with reckless speed. "Marcus!" he shouted, his voice echoing against the stone. "Marcus!" James lunged after him, closing the distance with practiced efficiency. He caught Tyler's arm just as the boy was about to round the boulder, pulling him back with enough force to spin him around. "Let me go!" Tyler fought against the ranger's grip. "I saw him. It was a red jacket." "And it could be a trap," James hissed, maintaining his hold despite Tyler struggling. "Think, Tyler. Marcus disappeared 5 years ago. Why would he be leading us on a chase now?" "Because he can't come to us directly," Tyler insisted, still trying to break free. "Maybe he's being watched too. Maybe he's trying to help us find him." The physical confrontation escalated as Tyler's frustration boiled over. He swung wildly at James, who deflected the blow while attempting to restrain rather than hurt the boy. "Stop it, both of you," Renee intervened, her voice cutting through their struggle. "We won't find Marcus by fighting each other." The moment of tension dissolved as quickly as it had erupted. Tyler stopped struggling, though his breathing remained rapid and shallow. James released his grip cautiously. "I'm sorry," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "It's just... I know it was him. I know it." James placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "I believe you saw someone, but we need to be smart about this." They made camp in a small cave-like formation that offered protection from the elements and limited approaches from one direction. Despite their exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Every sound from the forest seemed magnified. The rustle of leaves, the occasional call of a night bird, the distant sound of water flowing over rocks. Shortly before dawn, a soft knock at their camp startled them awake. Outside the entrance to their shelter, they found a sealed manila envelope that had not been there the night before. Inside was a collection of documents that made James's blood run cold. Military files, decades old, but stamped with classification markings he recognized from his service. The top page detailed studies of an unofficial isolated community in these mountains, classified as a sociological anomaly. The final recommendation was highlighted in fading yellow marker: avoid contact and interaction. dated 1952, and stamped, "Program terminated." While they were examining the electronic equipment, all the group's devices, GPS, cell phones, digital watches, stopped working simultaneously, and a distant flute sound echoed through the mountains, a melody that Tyler immediately recognized. That was Marcus's favorite song. Tyler stood frozen, the haunting melody of the flute seeming to vibrate through his very bones. "That's the song Dad wrote," he whispered. "Marcus played it every night before bed. No one else would know that tune." James studied the classified documents with growing concern. Military reports from the 1950s describing a community that shouldn't exist, living by their own rules in these mountains. These files suggest the government discovered this group decades ago, but decided to leave them alone. "Why would someone give these to us now?" Renee asked, carefully placing the documents back in the envelope. "Someone's guiding us," James replied, attempting once more to restart his GPS unit. The screen remained black, unresponsive. "And they're making sure we can't easily find our way back out." Tyler packed the documents carefully into his backpack. "The flute came from that direction," he said, pointing up the path that continued beyond their shelter. "We need to follow it." With no working navigation equipment, they relied on Tyler's growing understanding of the carved symbols. The boy moved with increasing confidence, identifying markings that would have been invisible to casual observers. Slight indentations in tree bark, arrangements of stones that appeared natural but followed specific patterns. "These aren't just directions," Tyler explained as they climbed higher along the hidden path. "They're a communication system. Look at how these 3 lines always point toward water sources, but when combined with this arc shape, they're warning about something." James nodded, impressed by the teen's observational skills. "Military intelligence could use someone like you." The terrain became increasingly difficult to navigate. What had appeared to be a natural rock wall revealed itself, under Tyler's guidance, to be a series of deliberately positioned boulders forming a labyrinthine path. Every few hundred yards, they found another symbol, each more complex than the last. "They're getting more elaborate," Tyler noted, tracing a particularly intricate carving with his fingers. "Like we're being tested, to see if we can read them correctly." The day grew warmer as they climbed, forcing them to shed layers. During a brief rest, James surveyed their surroundings with a practiced eye. "We're being watched," he said quietly, not looking in any particular direction. "Movement in the trees to our left. Someone's been paralleling our route for at least the past hour." Tyler nodded almost imperceptibly. "I noticed. They're using the high ground to track us." Renee felt a chill despite the warming air. "Who are they? Why not just approach us?" "Could be they're as cautious of us as we are of them," James suggested. "Or they're waiting for something specific." They continued their ascent, the feeling of surveillance never diminishing. By midday, they reached a clearing where a small stream cut across their path. Tyler immediately spotted more symbols carved into rocks along the water's edge. "These are fresh," he said, examining the clean-cut markings, "maybe just days old." "So someone is actively maintaining this trail system," James concluded. "It's not just historical remnants." As they filtered water for their canteens, a flash of red caught Renee's attention on the opposite bank. A small scrap of fabric caught on a thorny bush. She crossed the shallow stream, carefully retrieving what appeared to be a piece of weathered red cotton. "It could be from Marcus's jacket," she said, her voice tight with emotion as she rejoined the others. "The color is right." James examined the fabric. "Hard to tell how long it's been here. Could be recent, could be years old." They pushed onward, following Tyler's interpretation of the increasingly complex symbol system. The path led them to a large clearing where they discovered something unexpected, a circle of small sculptures crafted from stones and twigs, arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern. "It's like an art installation," Renee whispered, moving carefully around the perimeter. Each sculpture was unique, some resembling animals, others more abstract forms that seemed to capture motion in static materials. James knelt to examine the ground around the sculptures. "Look at these," he said, pointing to subtle indications in the soil. "Footprints, multiple sets. People gather here regularly." Tyler walked slowly around the circle, studying each sculpture. "These aren't random. They're telling a story." He pointed to several that formed a sequence. "See how this one flows into the next? It's like frames in an animation." As the afternoon waned, James grew increasingly alert to signs of surveillance. Small branches deliberately broken to make noise if disturbed, pebbles balanced on leaves as improvised alarms, even thin threads strung between trees that would vibrate if someone passed. "Whoever's watching us has military-grade security awareness," he murmured to Renee. "These are techniques I recognize from Special Forces training, but adapted using only natural materials." They made camp as darkness approached, choosing a defensible position with good sightlines. Despite his exhaustion, James insisted on setting watches through the night. "I'm not taking any chances," he told them. "Something doesn't feel right." During the first watch, Tyler sat with his back against a tree, straining his eyes against the darkness. The forest had fallen into an unnatural quiet. No chirping insects, no rustling of nocturnal animals. The silence itself felt like a warning. His attention snapped to a movement at the edge of their small campsite, shadows shifting in ways that couldn't be explained by the gentle breeze or their dying fire. Tyler remained perfectly still, remembering James's advice not to reveal that he'd spotted something. The shadows moved again, more distinctly human this time. Silent figures circled their camp, never approaching directly but clearly observing. Tyler counted at least 3 different positions where the darkness seemed deeper, more purposeful. When James took over for the second watch, Tyler whispered his observations. The former military man nodded grimly. "They're assessing us, trying to determine if we're a threat. Classic reconnaissance." "Why not just talk to us?" Tyler asked. "People who've lived in isolation this long develop their own protocols," James replied. "Trust has to be earned." Renee, unable to sleep, moved away from their campsite to clear her mind. Despite James's warnings about wandering alone, she needed a moment of solitude to process everything that had happened. Leaning against a large oak tree, she closed her eyes and took several deep breaths. When she opened them again, a figure stood 20 yards away, unmistakably wearing a bright red jacket. "Marcus," she gasped, her heart nearly stopping. The figure remained motionless for a long moment, then turned and moved deeper into the forest. Without thinking, Renee followed, calling her son's name. "Marcus, wait! It's Mom!" The figure moved with surprising speed, always remaining just visible enough to follow, but never close enough to clearly identify. Renee pursued desperately, stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness, branches scratching her face and arms. "Please!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Marcus!" The red jacket disappeared around a large boulder. When Renee rounded the same spot seconds later, the forest before her was empty. She spun in circles, searching frantically for any sign of movement, but found nothing. Disoriented and breathing heavily, she realized she could no longer see the glow of their campfire. Panic began to rise as she tried to retrace her steps, but every direction looked the same in the darkness. "Renee!" James's voice called from somewhere to her left. "Stay where you are. Keep calling out." She did as instructed, her voice helping guide James to her location. He appeared minutes later, concern etched on his face. "What happened?" he demanded, taking her arm to steady her. "I saw someone in a red jacket," she said, still trying to catch her breath. I was sure it was Marcus." James scanned the area with his flashlight. "Let's get back to camp. We can search properly in daylight." Using his military training, James navigated by the stars, leading them safely back to where Tyler waited anxiously. "I heard Mom shouting," the boy said. "What happened?" After Renee explained her encounter, they spent the remainder of the night on high alert, but no further disturbances occurred. As dawn broke, they discovered something unexpected. Their backpacks, left carefully outside the tent, had been opened and the contents rearranged. "Nothing's missing," James confirmed after a thorough check. They just inspected everything. Tyler found a small package wrapped in large leaves placed beside his sleeping bag. Inside were dried herbs with a distinctive smell. Some kind of medicine, he guessed, carefully rewrapping the package. As they prepared to continue their journey, the tension of the previous night gave way to a strange sense of progress. They could have harmed us if they wanted to, James reasoned. Instead, they left medicine. I think we're being evaluated. The path led them to what appeared to be a sheer rock face, impossible to climb or circumvent. Tyler studied the area carefully before identifying a nearly invisible symbol carved into the stone at eye level. "Here," he said, his fingers tracing the marking. "This indicates a hidden passage." What had seemed solid rock revealed itself, upon closer inspection, to be a cleverly disguised opening, narrow but passable for a single person at a time. They squeezed through the tight space, emerging into a sheltered valley that took their breath away. Before them stretched a vast field of cultivated plants, not random wild growth, but carefully tended rows of medicinal herbs, vegetables, and flowers unlike any they'd seen before. The entire valley was invisible from any surrounding ridge, perfectly concealed by the natural rock formations. In the center of this hidden garden stood a wooden structure, its design unlike any modern building. Constructed without nails or screws, the interlocking wooden beams formed a perfectly balanced small building with a distinctive symbol carved into its door, the unmistakable outline of a red coat. Tyler approached the structure slowly, his hand reaching out to touch the carved symbol. The door yielded to his gentle pressure, swinging inward on silent hinges, to reveal an empty room with a single table in the center. Spread across the table were handmade maps of the surrounding mountains, marked with trails and observation points that appeared on no official survey. "This is incredible," Renee whispered, studying the detailed cartography. "These show passages I don't think anyone from the outside world knows exist." As they explored the valley, they discovered more evidence of sophisticated engineering, an irrigation system that utilized natural water pressure from mountain springs, garden beds positioned to maximize sunlight throughout the changing seasons, and several small dwellings, all currently empty. "Where is everyone?" Tyler wondered aloud, examining a wall covered in the same symbols he'd been studying for years. As he traced the intricate patterns with his fingers, understanding dawned on his face. These aren't just directions or warnings. They're a complete writing system. Renee wandered into another structure and gasped. Inside were dozens of handcrafted musical instruments, flutes carved from different woods, small drums with stretched animal hides, and string instruments unlike any she recognized. She picked up a flute similar to the one they'd heard playing Marcus's song, running her fingers along its polished surface. Before she could attempt to play it, a sudden sound from outside alerted them to approaching footsteps. Many footsteps. "Someone's coming," James warned, moving quickly to the door. The trio gathered together as figures emerged from the forest edge, people dressed in simple, handmade clothing, carrying wooden staffs adorned with symbols matching those they'd been following. Leading them was an elderly woman whose deeply lined face spoke of decades in the mountains, her penetrating gaze fixing immediately on Tyler. She approached without fear, reaching out to touch the boy's face with weathered fingers. Tyler remained perfectly still, meeting her eyes steadily. To everyone's surprise, Tyler broke the tense silence by kneeling and drawing one of the more complex symbols in the dirt at the woman's feet. The old woman's expression shifted from caution to curiosity, and the armed figures surrounding her lowered their staffs slightly. The woman spoke in a language none of them recognized, her voice strong despite her advanced age. She gestured for them to follow her to a central gathering area where wooden benches formed a circle. Once seated, she offered each of them a ceramic cup filled with a steaming herbal liquid. Communication was difficult, but the woman's occasional English words, spoken with an archaic accent, helped bridge the gap. "We shelter those who see beyond," she explained haltingly, tapping her temple and then her heart. James asked directly about Marcus, causing an immediate ripple of tension among the gathered community members. Several exchanged concerned glances, while others gripped their staffs more tightly. The old woman rose without answering, disappearing into one of the larger structures. When she returned, she carried a leather-bound sketchbook that made Renee gasp in recognition. "That's Marcus's," she whispered, her hands trembling as she accepted the book. Inside were dozens of drawings, detailed renderings of the hidden valley, portraits of community members engaged in daily activities, studies of plants and animals found nowhere in standard biology texts. Each image was signed simply M. Williams and dated throughout the past 5 years. Tears streamed down Renee's face as she turned page after page, seeing the world through her missing son's eyes. "Where is he?" she finally asked, her voice breaking with emotion. "Where is my son?" The elderly woman's expression softened with something like compassion. "He is in the passage, where all artists go when ready for great work," she replied in her halting English. "He returns when moon is full, 2 nights from now." Upon crossing the narrow passage between the rocks, the trio emerged in a hidden valley, where, surprisingly, they found a vast field of medicinal plants carefully cultivated, and, in the center, a wooden structure with the drawing of a red coat engraved on the door. Tyler's fingers traced the intricate carving of the red coat on the wooden door. The symbol seemed to pulse beneath his touch, as if recognizing something in him. The door swung open with barely a sound, revealing a simple room dominated by a large table covered with handmade maps. "These are incredible," Tyler whispered, leaning over the detailed renderings. Each map showcased the valley and surrounding mountains with a precision that surpassed any official survey he'd ever studied. Renee joined him at the table, her fingers hovering over the meticulously drawn landmarks. "Look at these pathways. They're not on any commercial maps. Hidden trails, observation points." James examined the craftsmanship with professional appreciation. "Whoever made these understands topography better than most Forest Service cartographers. They've marked water sources, dangerous terrain, everything you'd need to navigate unseen." They stepped outside to explore the rest of the valley. The field of medicinal plants stretched before them in neat rows, each section seemingly organized by purpose and growing conditions. James knelt beside an irrigation channel that ran between the plantings. "This system is ingenious," he said, studying how water flowed through carefully constructed stone channels. "They're using natural pressure from the mountain springs, regulating flow with these adjustable gates. I've seen similar techniques in remote villages in Afghanistan, but nothing this sophisticated using only natural materials." Tyler wandered among the plants, recognizing some from his research, Echinacea, Valerian foxglove, alongside others he couldn't identify. "Some of these species shouldn't be able to grow in this climate," he noted. "They must have developed special cultivation methods." Renee moved toward a cluster of small dwellings built into the natural contours of the valley walls. Each structure was crafted from local timber and stone, designed to blend seamlessly with the landscape. Inside the first cabin, she found simple furnishings, hand-carved chairs, a table, shelves lined with clay pots containing dried herbs and tinctures. "These look recently used," she called to the others. "The hearth still has warm ashes." James nodded. "They left in a hurry when they detected us approaching. Standard defensive procedure: clear the area, observe from a distance, assess the threat." They continued exploring, finding more evidence of a sophisticated community living in balanced isolation. Tyler discovered a cabin with walls covered in the symbolic language he'd been studying, the markings forming complete panels of text. "It's a fully developed writing system," he said, excitement building in his voice. "Not just trail markers or warnings. These tell stories, record knowledge." His fingers traced one particular sequence. "I think this describes seasonal planting cycles, correlating with lunar phases." Renee found herself drawn to a structure near the center of the settlement. Inside, musical instruments lined the walls, flutes carved from different woods, small drums with stretched hides, string instruments constructed with remarkable precision. "Marcus would love this," she whispered, picking up a flute similar to the one they'd heard earlier. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood polished by years of handling. A sound from outside froze them all in place. The unmistakable crunch of approaching footsteps on the path. Many footsteps. "They're coming back," James said quietly, moving to the doorway. "Stay calm, no sudden movements." The three regrouped outside as figures emerged from the forest edge. A dozen people approached, dressed in clothing that combined handmade elements with what appeared to be repurposed modern fabrics. Most carried wooden staffs adorned with symbols matching those they'd been following. Their expressions were wary, but not overtly hostile. At their center walked an elderly woman, her silver hair wrapped in a complex braid around her head. Deep lines etched her face, yet her posture remained straight, her movements fluid as she approached the visitors. Her eyes, sharp and evaluating, fixed immediately on Tyler. Without speaking, she reached out weathered hands to touch the boy's face, her fingers tracing his features as if reading a map. Tyler remained perfectly still, allowing the examination. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Tyler, drawing on years of research, knelt and used his finger to trace one of the more complex symbols in the dirt between them. 3 interlocking circles with a central eye. A murmur passed through the gathered community members. The old woman's expression shifted from cautious assessment to genuine interest. She spoke in a language none of them recognized, her voice surprisingly strong. A young man stepped forward and translated in halting, formal English. "She asks how you know our sacred patterns." "I've studied them," Tyler replied, pointing to his backpack. "For years, since my brother disappeared." The translator conferred with the elder, then addressed them again. "Come, we will speak." They were led to a circular clearing where log benches formed a meeting area. The community members arranged themselves in what appeared to be a hierarchical pattern, with the elder seated directly across from the visitors. Clay cups of steaming herbal tea were placed in their hands. The liquid smelled of mint and something unfamiliar, fragrant and complex. James hesitated before drinking, but Renee and Tyler sipped cautiously. "It's good," Tyler said, surprised by the layered flavors. The elder smiled for the first time, her weathered face transforming momentarily. She spoke again, the young man translating. "She says you have traveled far, following markers few outsiders can read. Why do you seek us?" Renee leaned forward. "My son, Marcus Williams, disappeared 5 years ago. We found his camera with photos of this place, of these symbols. We believe he's here, or was here." The translation caused visible tension among the group. Several exchanged concerned glances. Others gripped their staffs more tightly. The elder spoke directly to them in heavily accented, archaic-sounding English. "We shelter those who see beyond." She tapped her temple, then her heart. "Those called by mountain spirit." James studied the gathered faces carefully. "You've been here a long time, haven't you? Living apart from the outside world." The elder nodded. "Many generations. Since before Great War." "Civil War?" James asked, surprised. A younger woman nearby shook her head. "Before that, when settlers first came." Tyler's eyes widened. That would make this settlement over 200 years old. The elder rose without responding and walked to a larger structure nearby. When she returned, she carried a leather-bound sketchbook that made Renee gasp. "That's Marcus's," she whispered, recognizing the worn cover immediately. The elder handed her the book with a solemn nod. Inside were pages filled with detailed drawings, panoramic views of the hidden valley, portraits of community members engaged in daily activities, studies of unusual plants and natural formations. Each was signed simply M. Williams and dated throughout the past 5 years. Renee's hands trembled as she turned the pages, seeing the world through her missing son's eyes. The drawings were beautiful, showing not just technical skill but deep emotional connection to the subjects. "He has gift," the elder said, watching Renee's reaction. "Sees truth behind shapes." "Where is he?" Renee asked, her voice breaking. "Where is my son?" The elder's expression softened with something like compassion. "He is in Passage, where artists go when ready for great work. Returns when moon is full, 2 nights from now." "What is this Passage?" James asked. A middle-aged man with intricate tattoos along his arms explained, "A place of isolation and creation, where one connects with the mountain spirit to make most important work." Tyler examined the final pages of Marcus's sketchbook, finding preliminary drawings for what appeared to be a major project, a series connected by theme and technique, but unfinished. "These are beautiful," he said. "He's really developed his style." The elder nodded approvingly at Tyler. "Brother understands. You also have gift, yes? Read our symbols without teaching." Before Tyler could respond, James asked the question that had been troubling him since they discovered the military documents. "Has your community had trouble with outsiders before? Government officials, perhaps?" The atmosphere chilled noticeably. The elder's face hardened as she nodded. "Long ago, men with weapons came, studied us like animals, then decided to leave us alone. Better that way." "They wrote reports," James confirmed. "Classified your community as a sociological anomaly and recommended no further contact." "Wise choice," said a scarred older man at the elder's right hand. "We have protected this valley for generations. We'll continue to do so." As night fell, the community lit torches around the central area. More members emerged from surrounding dwellings, including children who regarded the visitors with unabashed curiosity. A simple but nourishing meal was shared: root vegetables, fresh bread, and a stew of unfamiliar ingredients. Throughout the evening, Tyler observed how the community functioned. The seamless way tasks were divided, the respect shown to elders, the education of children who appeared to be learning both traditional knowledge and modified versions of modern sciences. "They're not primitive," he whispered to James. "They've just chosen which technologies to adopt and which to reject." James nodded. "Selective advancement. They understand electricity. Look at those small solar panels on the storage building, but they use it minimally." Renee sat apart, still absorbed in Marcus's sketchbook, tracing her fingers over his signature on each page. A young girl approached, offering a blanket against the evening chill. "He speaks of you," the child said in clear English. "The picture maker. He misses your voice." Before Renee could question her further, the girl skipped away to join the other children. Later, as they were shown to guest quarters, a clean, simple cabin with comfortable sleeping pallets, Renee finally asked the question that had been burning within her since finding the sketchbook. Why would Marcus choose to stay here? Why wouldn't he contact us? Let us know he was alive. The elder, who had escorted them personally, paused at the doorway. When he came, he was near death. Lost in storm, leg broken. Many weeks healing. She gestured to her head. Mind also needed healing. Found peace here, purpose, but never forgot family. Will we see him when he returns from this passage? Renee pressed. The elder studied her face for a long moment. He is in Passage, where all artists go when ready for great work, and will only return when the moon is full, in 2 days. Renee awoke before dawn, Marcus's sketchbook clutched to her chest. She'd fallen asleep studying the drawings, searching for clues about who her son had become in the 5 years since his disappearance. Now, in the soft gray light filtering through the cabin's small window, she traced her fingers over a particularly detailed self-portrait. Marcus had drawn himself standing on a rocky outcropping, the valley spread below him, his expression serene and purposeful, so different from the uncertain teenager who had vanished on that school trip. "I need to see this passage," she whispered to herself, carefully placing the sketchbook in her pack. Outside, the hidden valley was coming alive with activity. Community members moved purposefully between buildings, tending gardens, carrying water, and preparing for the day. Despite their isolation, there was nothing chaotic or primitive about their routines. The entire settlement operated with quiet efficiency. Renee found the elder woman sitting on a bench overlooking the medicinal garden, her wrinkled hands methodically sorting herbs into small woven baskets. "May I join you?" Renee asked. The elder nodded, shifting slightly to make room. "Could not wait for answers," she observed, not a question, but a statement of fact. "I need to understand," Renee admitted. "Why Marcus would choose to stay here without contacting us. We thought he was dead. We mourned him." The elder's hands never paused in their sorting. "When Boy came, he was broken, not just body, spirit." She tapped her chest. "Found belonging here he never had there. Feared you would force him to return." "I wouldn't have," Renee began, then stopped herself, uncertain if that was true. 5 years ago, she absolutely would have insisted Marcus come home, regardless of his wishes. "Tell me about this passage," she asked instead. The elder gestured toward the high peaks visible above the valley walls. "Sacred place, where those with gift go to create their most important work. No distractions, just artist and mountain spirit." She looked directly at Renee. "Marcus ready for great work now, shows maturity." Before Renee could inquire further, Tyler emerged from the guest cabin. Immediately drawn to a group of young people gathered around an older man demonstrating something with animated gestures. "Your younger son also has gift," the elder observed. "Different, but strong. Sees patterns others miss." Renee watched as Tyler was welcomed into the circle, the teenagers making space for him without hesitation. He's devoted the past 5 years to finding his brother. Taught himself anthropology, linguistics, survival skills. Anything he thought might help. The elder nodded approvingly. "Good preparation for what comes next." "What do you mean?" But the elderly woman had returned to her herbs, conversation clearly finished. Tyler found himself invited into what appeared to be a teaching session. The older man, who introduced himself as Gabriel, was explaining the properties of various plants for both medicinal and practical uses. "This one," Gabriel said, holding up a spiky-leaved plant Tyler didn't recognize, "stops bleeding instantly when crushed and applied to wounds. We've refined cultivation techniques that make it twice as potent as its wild cousin." The young community members, ranging from Tyler's age to early 20s, handled each specimen with practiced familiarity. One girl, perhaps 17, noticed Tyler's intense interest. "You are the pattern reader," she said softly. "The one who followed the trail symbols." Tyler nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "I've been studying them since my brother disappeared, but I still don't understand everything." Gabriel gestured Tyler forward. "Our writing system evolved over generations, combining elements from many cultures. Those who founded our community brought diverse knowledge." He led Tyler to a small building he hadn't noticed the previous day. Inside, to Tyler's astonishment, was a library. Shelves of hand-bound books alongside preserved volumes clearly salvaged from the outside world. Some appeared centuries old, their bindings carefully restored and maintained. "This is incredible," Tyler breathed, gently touching a leather-bound tome whose spine indicated a publication date of 1792. "How did you preserve these?" "Knowledge of paper conservation came with third generation of settlers," Gabriel explained. "We adapt techniques from many sources. Take what is useful, leave what is harmful." Tyler noticed several modern textbooks on botany, engineering, and medicine among the older volumes. "You don't reject all outside knowledge." "We reject not knowledge, but the systems that misuse it," a young woman replied. "Each generation select members venture out to learn what might benefit our community." Tyler's mind raced with questions, but before he could ask more, Gabriel guided him to a separate section where dozens of journals were carefully arranged. "Each person who joins us permanently contributes their story," Gabriel explained. "So knowledge is never lost." Tyler's hand hovered over one particular volume. "Is one of these Marcus's?" Gabriel nodded, "but not yet complete. When he returns from passage, he will add final chapters." James spent the morning with several older men, learning about the community's security systems. What had initially appeared to be simple surveillance turned out to be an intricate network of observers and signals that allowed them to monitor approaches to the valley from miles away. "We maintain watch stations on all major approaches," explained Daniel, a muscular man in his 60s whose weathered face spoke of decades in the elements. "Each station can signal the next, using methods that leave no electronic signature. Military would call this a low-tech but highly effective perimeter defense," James observed. Daniel smiled slightly. "Some of our methods were learned from watching your military operations in these mountains decades ago. We adapted what worked." The men showed James their system of carved symbols that could quickly communicate specific threats: rangers, hunters, logging crews, or other potential intruders. "How often do outsiders get as close as we did?" James asked. "Almost never," Daniel replied. "Most hikers follow established trails. We only actively divert those who come too close to our boundaries. Like Marcus did 5 years ago." Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Boy was different. Followed markers meant to deter, not guide. As if mountain itself called him. Another elder spoke up. "Not all who find us are meant to stay. Some we guide back to main trails, memories confused by herbs in their water." He studied James carefully. "You were military? Special forces?" James nodded, unsurprised they had identified his background. 2 decades, including operations in remote, sensitive locations. The men exchanged glances. "Then you understand necessity of protecting one's home from those who would destroy it through ignorance or intention." "I do," James agreed. "But I'm curious. Why maintain this isolation in the modern era? Why not integrate more with the outside world?" The eldest of the group, a man with a long white beard and tattoos similar to those James had seen on indigenous elders in the Pacific Northwest, finally spoke. "We tried once, 70 years ago. Sent representatives to your government. They responded by sending scientists to study us like laboratory specimens, then military observers." His voice hardened. "Then came men who wished to relocate us, for our own good. Take children for proper education." James winced, recognizing the familiar pattern of forced assimilation that had devastated Native communities throughout American history. "The documents we found," he said. "They classified your community as a sociological anomaly." "Yes. Eventually they decided we were not worth the effort to destroy." The old man's eyes held centuries of collective wariness. "We are permitted to exist because we are forgotten. We prefer it this way." As dusk approached, a young runner arrived from one of the observation posts, delivering news that sent the community into organized action. James was quickly summoned to meet with the elder and other community leaders in the central meeting area. "Watchers report large group approaching from Southern Ridge," Daniel explained as they hurried to the gathering, moving deliberately toward Valley using search pattern. "Sheriff Miller," James concluded grimly. I was hoping he wouldn't mobilize this quickly. In the meeting circle, Renee and Tyler joined them as the elder listened to reports from several scouts. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes reflected concern. How many? She asked. At least 12, replied a breathless young woman, with dogs and equipment, following our false trails now, but moving steadily closer. The elder turned to James. These are your people. What do they want? To find us, James replied honestly. Sheriff Miller believes you're a dangerous cult. He thinks we need rescuing. A ripple of dark amusement passed through the gathered community members. This has happened before, Daniel said. Last time, 30 years ago. We disappeared into the deep caves until they left. We have less time to prepare now, another elder cautioned. They move faster with modern equipment. The community mobilized with practiced efficiency. Children were gathered and led toward what appeared to be hidden entrances in the valley wall. Elders carried precious books and artifacts. Younger adults began systematically dismantling evidence of their more permanent structures. What can we do to help? Renee asked, watching the activity with growing alarm. The elder studied her for a moment. You must decide where you stand. With them. She gestured toward the approaching search party. Or with us. With Marcus, Renee replied without hesitation. Tyler nodded in agreement. We didn't come all this way to leave without him. James stepped forward. I can buy you time. Go out to meet them. Use my authority to slow them down. What authority? Daniel asked skeptically. James produced his military ID card. Former Special Forces commander carries weight, even with local law enforcement. I can claim this area is under federal environmental study. It might confuse jurisdictional lines long enough to matter. The elder considered this, then nodded. We accept your help, but remember, if your words fail, we have protected this valley for generations by any means necessary. As the community continued its rapid but orderly evacuation to hidden caves beneath the valley, Renee discovered a small cabin she hadn't noticed before. Inside, protected from the elements, were dozens of artworks created by community members throughout the decades, paintings, sculptures, carvings, and photographs, all capturing the essence of the mountain in different styles and eras. With a shock of recognition, she realized many pieces corresponded to descriptions of works by artists who had vanished in these mountains over the years. A landscape in oils signed E. Montgomery, 1967, was unmistakably the work of a painter who had disappeared while on a solo camping trip. A series of black and white photographs bore the distinctive style of a photojournalist who had vanished in 1982. They all chose to stay, Tyler whispered, joining her in the cabin. Like Marcus. As they helped carefully pack the artwork for evacuation to the caves, a soft melody drifted through the valley. The same flute song they had heard before, Marcus's song. But this time, when Tyler rushed outside to locate the source, the melody stopped abruptly, replaced by a sudden, urgent drumbeat from the observation post. The elder appeared beside them, her face grave. They are closer than we thought. No more time. She pointed to the cave entrances where the last community members were disappearing. You must decide now. Come with us, or meet your people. In the distance, the sound of rescue dogs barking echoed across the valley. In 100 years, we have never revealed our existence, the elder continued urgently. If they find us now, everything will be lost. Tyler studied the symbols carved around the cave entrance, his eyes widening with sudden understanding. These markers we followed, he began, turning to James with horror dawning on his face. They weren't just random. They were recently carved, made specifically to draw us in. His voice dropped to a whisper. This was a trap, not for us, but for whoever followed us. At the moment of tension, while the force police approached, a young man sounded the warning drum from the observation post. During the confrontation, James and one of the protectors of the community began to fight. In the struggle, Renee fell into a hidden crack in the ground, sliding away from the others, separated in the underground darkness while hearing the footsteps of the police force approaching. The haunting melody of the flute echoed across the valley, freezing everyone in place. The community members who had been hastily evacuating paused, exchanging alarmed glances. "He doesn't know," the elder whispered, her weathered face creasing with concern. Several younger members immediately sprinted toward the sound, moving with the silent efficiency of those who had spent their lives navigating these mountains. Renee's heart hammered against her ribs. "Marcus," she breathed, already moving in the direction of the music. The elder's hand shot out, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Wait. They will bring him safely." But 5 years of searching, of wondering, of grieving a son who wasn't dead, had left Renee incapable of waiting a moment longer. She pulled free from the elder's grasp and began running up the steep trail toward the ridgeline, her muscles burning with the effort. The path twisted upward through dense undergrowth before opening onto a rocky outcropping. Renee paused, gasping for breath, scanning the terrain ahead. The flute's melody seemed to come from a ledge about 50 yards above her position, partially obscured by a stand of ancient pines. She scrambled upward, using tree roots and rock formations for handholds. As she neared the ledge, the flute music stopped abruptly. Renee froze, terrified she had somehow scared him away. "Marcus?" she called, her voice cracking with emotion. Silence answered her, broken only by the rustle of wind through the pines. Then, a slight movement. A figure rising from a seated position on the edge of the stone promontory. He stood with his back to her, taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader. The red jacket, faded now from years of sun and weather, hung loosely on his frame. When he finally turned, Renee felt her knees weaken. Marcus was 20 now, no longer the lanky 15-year-old who had vanished that autumn day. His face had matured, cheekbones more pronounced, jaw stronger. But his eyes, they were unchanged, the same thoughtful, deep brown that had always seemed to see more than others. "Mom," he said simply, the word carrying 5 years of absence. Renee closed the distance between them in 3 desperate strides, pulling her son into an embrace that sought to reclaim all the lost time. At first, Marcus stood stiffly in her arms, as if he'd forgotten the feeling of being held. Then, gradually, he softened, his arms coming around her. "You found me," he whispered against her hair. Before she could respond, the urgent sound of the community's warning drums echoed across the valley. Marcus pulled back, instantly alert. "They're coming," he said, concern replacing the momentary warmth in his expression. "Why did you bring them here?" "We didn't," Renee started to explain, but Marcus was already moving, gathering a leather satchel and his flute. "We need to get back. Now." He took her hand, guiding her toward a different path than the one she'd climbed, a nearly invisible trail that wound more directly down to the valley floor. As they descended, Marcus explained in hurried fragments, "I've been at the passage, a retreat cave higher in the mountains where we go to create our most important work. I had no idea anyone was searching for me now." "We've been searching for 5 years," Renee said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Marcus paused briefly, pain flashing across his features. "I know, and I'm sorry, but there's no time now. If outsiders find the community, everything will be destroyed." When they reached the valley floor, chaos had given way to organized evacuation. The remaining community members were disappearing into hidden cave entrances, carrying only essential items and cultural treasures. Tyler spotted them first, racing across the clearing with a mixture of shock and elation on his face. He skidded to a halt several feet from Marcus, suddenly uncertain. The brother he'd idolized frozen in his memory as a 15-year-old, now confronted with this stranger who wore his face. "Tyler," Marcus said, his voice softening. "You've grown." The brothers regarded each other for a suspended moment before Tyler launched himself forward, colliding with Marcus in a fierce hug. "You jerk," he mumbled against his brother's shoulder. 5 years. 5 years without a word." Their reunion was cut short by James's urgent approach. "Sheriff Miller and his deputies are less than 20 minutes out," he reported. "They've got dogs tracking our scent." Marcus turned to the elder, who had been watching the family reunion with knowing eyes. "We need to deploy the false trails," he said in the community's language. She nodded, dispatching several young members who immediately set off in different directions, carrying items of clothing that would confuse the tracking dogs. "I'll intercept them," James offered. "Try to slow them down." Marcus shook his head. "It won't work. Miller's been looking for an excuse to search these mountains for years. He believes there's a dangerous cult operating here." "Then what do we do?" Tyler asked. The elder stepped forward. "We hide, as we have always done. The deep caves connect to passages that lead to other valleys. We have provisions stored throughout." "And after they leave?" Renee questioned. "You'll just come back and rebuild?" "If it is safe," the elder confirmed. "We have endured worse over the centuries." Marcus turned to his mother and brother. "You need to decide quickly. You can come with us, or you can return to meet the sheriff's party. Tell them you got lost, that you found nothing." "We're not leaving without you," Renee stated firmly. "Then you come with us," Marcus replied, already guiding them toward the main cave entrance, where the last community members were disappearing. James hesitated. "I'll stay. I can misdirect them, use my ranger credentials to create confusion." Before they could protest, the sound of barking dogs grew louder, closer than anyone had anticipated. A young scout burst from the tree line, breathing hard. "They're coming from 2 directions. They must have split their forces." The elder's expression hardened with resolve. "Go," she commanded. "All of you, into the caves. Now." As they hurried toward the cave entrance, the first deputies emerged from the forest edge, Sheriff Miller in the lead. His expression shifted from determination to surprise when he spotted James. "Harrington, what the hell are you doing here? This is way outside your jurisdiction." James stepped forward, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. There's no danger here. Step aside," Miller ordered, his hand moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "We've got reports of a potentially dangerous cult operating in these mountains, possibly holding people against their will." "That's not what's happening," James insisted, standing his ground. While James attempted to delay the sheriff, Marcus hurried Renee and Tyler toward the cave entrance. They had nearly reached it when more deputies emerged from the opposite tree line, cutting off their escape route. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them," a young deputy shouted, his service weapon drawn. Marcus stepped in front of his mother and brother, raising his hands slowly. Several community members who hadn't yet entered the caves emerged to stand beside him, forming a protective line. "What's going on here?" Sheriff Miller demanded, striding across the clearing. His eyes fixed on Marcus, recognition dawning. "Wait, are you the Williams boy? The one who disappeared 5 years ago?" Marcus nodded calmly. "I am Marcus Williams, and I wasn't kidnapped or held against my will. I chose to stay here." The sheriff's eyes narrowed skeptically. "Son, you were 15 when you disappeared. Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing." "This isn't a hostage situation," Marcus replied evenly. "This is a peaceful community that has existed in these mountains for generations. They saved my life when I was lost and injured." Renee stepped forward to stand beside her son. "Sheriff Miller, I've spent 5 years searching for my son. Now that I've found him, I can see he's made his own choice. He's an adult now." Miller's expression wavered between confusion and suspicion. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we need to conduct a proper investigation. If there are people living up here permanently, there are zoning laws, regulations." Laws written by those who see only resources to exploit, the elder interjected, her voice carrying surprising authority for her slight frame. We have been caretakers of this mountain since before your government existed. The tension in the clearing grew palpable as more deputies arrived, forming a loose perimeter around the community members. One particularly nervous young deputy kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, his hand hovering near his weapon. Everyone just stay calm, James urged, positioning himself between the two groups. The nervous deputy suddenly jerked his weapon upward as a community member moved to comfort a frightened child. James reacted instantly, stepping forward to intervene, his military training taking over. Gun down! Now! He barked, moving toward the deputy. The young officer, startled by James's commanding approach, swung his weapon toward the perceived threat. In that split second of confusion, Marcus lunged forward, pushing James aside just as the deputy's finger tensed on the trigger. Stop! Marcus shouted, his voice echoing across the clearing. No one needs to get hurt today. The deputy froze, his weapon still raised but his finger easing away from the trigger as Sheriff Miller bellowed, Stand down, Carter! Holster that weapon now! In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus stood tall in his faded red jacket, addressing the officers with a calm authority that belied his 20 years. I wasn't kidnapped, he stated clearly for all to hear. I was injured and lost. This community found me, healed me, and gave me purpose. Look around you. Do you see weapons? Do you see barriers or restraints? Everyone here has chosen this life. James seized the opportunity, stepping forward again. Sheriff, I've been with these people for several days now. They're not a cult. They're preserving something valuable, traditional knowledge, sustainable living practices, artistic traditions that date back centuries. Sheriff Miller's expression remained skeptical. If they're not hiding anything, why live in secret? Because every time they've tried to engage with the outside world, they've been threatened, James replied. Your own department has records from the 1950s classifying this community as a sociological anomaly to be left alone. The standoff continued, with deputies and community members eyeing each other warily. Tyler, who had been studying the reactions of the law enforcement officers, noticed several of them lowering their weapons, uncertainty replacing their initial aggression. Taking advantage of this shifting mood, Marcus proposed an unexpected solution. Let me show you all what we really do here, the great work we've been creating, something that could change how the world sees these mountains, and perhaps itself. Sheriff Miller's face creased with skepticism. Show us what exactly? Marcus stood confidently in the center of the clearing, the setting sun casting long shadows across his features. The reason this community has existed for centuries, our purpose. He gestured toward the cave entrance. If you'll follow me, unarmed, I can show you what we've been protecting all this time. The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies. I'm not sending my men into unknown caves without protection. Then just you, Marcus suggested, and my family. James, too. See for yourself before making judgments that could destroy something irreplaceable. After a tense negotiation, Sheriff Miller finally agreed to enter with a small group, himself, 2 deputies, James, Renee, and Tyler, while the remaining officers stayed outside with the community members who hadn't yet evacuated. Marcus led them to the cave entrance, where the elder stood waiting. She handed him a lantern crafted from materials that seemed both ancient and modern. A wooden frame housing what appeared to be a sophisticated light source. These tunnels have been mapped and maintained for generations, Marcus explained as they entered the cool darkness. What seems like natural formations are actually carefully engineered passages. The sheriff followed with obvious reluctance, his hand still hovering near his holstered weapon. How far are we going? Not far, Marcus assured him, guiding them through a narrow corridor that suddenly opened into a vast underground chamber. As their eyes adjusted, gasps of astonishment echoed through the space. The cavern ceiling soared 30 feet above them, with an ingenious system of mirrors redirecting sunlight from hidden openings above. The natural light illuminated various workstations, where community members were carefully preserving specimens of plants, cataloging them in leather-bound journals, and processing them into tinctures and medicines. "This is our primary work area," Marcus explained, leading them deeper into the chamber. "What you're seeing is generations of botanical knowledge being preserved and expanded." Tyler marveled at the sophisticated mirror system. "They've created natural skylights," he whispered to his mother, "perfect for growing plants underground." The sheriff moved cautiously from station to station, his expression gradually shifting from suspicion to grudging curiosity. "What exactly are you preserving here?" Marcus gestured to a young woman working at a nearby table. "Layla can explain better than I can." The woman looked up from her work, setting aside a plant specimen. "We document and preserve species that are disappearing from these mountains, many with medicinal properties unknown to modern pharmacology." She indicated a series of precise illustrations accompanying her notes. "Each generation adds to our knowledge base." This isn't just gardening, Tyler realized, examining the carefully organized specimens. "You're creating a living archive of biodiversity." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "Some of these plants exist nowhere else. They've been extirpated from every habitat except the protected microclimates in these mountains." The sheriff frowned. "If this work is so important, why keep it secret? Why not collaborate with universities, research institutions?" "We tried, decades ago," said a gray-haired man approaching from another section of the cave. "Your institutions wanted to patent our discoveries, commodify knowledge freely shared for generations. When we refused, they attempted to take samples without permission." Renee observed her son with new eyes as he moved confidently through the underground workspace. Gone was the uncertain teenager who had disappeared 5 years ago. In his place stood a young man with purpose and belonging etched into every movement. "This way," Marcus guided them toward a tunnel branching off the main chamber. "I want to show you the integration center." The passage opened into another large space where several community members worked with what appeared to be salvage technology. Solar panels connected to basic computers, LED grow lights, and monitoring equipment. "We don't reject technology," Marcus explained, noting the sheriff's surprise. "We evaluate each innovation on its merits, adapting what serves our purpose while rejecting what doesn't." James examined a water filtration system, unlike anything he'd seen before. "This combines modern filtration technology with traditional methods," he observed. "More efficient than commercial systems." The sheriff seemed increasingly unsettled by what he was seeing. Not the dangerous cult he'd expected, but a sophisticated community dedicated to preservation and sustainable living. "These people aren't criminals, Miller," James said quietly. "They're caretakers." As they continued through the caverns, Marcus led them to what he called the heart, a massive chamber where the community's artistic and scientific work merged. The walls displayed generations of photography, painting, and sculpture, all documenting the changing mountain ecosystem and community life. "The great work," Marcus explained, "is our ongoing effort to document and preserve not just species, but knowledge, techniques, cultural practices, ways of living in harmony with the natural world that are being forgotten." He guided Renee to a section of photographs that she immediately recognized as his work. Intimate portraits of community members, studies of rare plants captured with artistic sensitivity, landscapes that revealed the hidden beauty of the mountains. "This is what I was meant to do, Mom," Marcus said softly. "That day I got lost. It wasn't an accident. I was following something I couldn't explain, drawn to these symbols, to this place." Renee studied the photographs with a parent's fierce pride and growing understanding. "These are beautiful, Marcus. You've developed so much as an artist." The community recognized something in me, he explained. A way of seeing that could help document their work. They gave me purpose when I was lost in more ways than one. Tyler had wandered to another section of the chamber where he discovered an area dedicated to anthropological studies, detailed documentation of the community's own evolution, linguistic patterns, and cultural practices. "This is incredible," he breathed, recognizing elements that connected to his own research. "You've been studying yourselves as much as the natural world." An older community member nodded. "We must understand our own history to avoid repeating mistakes. Each generation refines our practices, adapts to changing conditions." The sheriff, who had been silently taking in the extensive archives, finally spoke. "This is all very impressive, but it doesn't change the fact that you're occupying federal land without authorization, potentially violating dozens of regulations." Marcus turned to face him directly. "These mountains were home to this community long before they became federal land. Some laws deserve to be questioned when they serve to dispossess people of their ancestral territories." The tension in the room shifted as one of the deputies knocked over a glass container, sending ancient seeds scattering across the stone floor. The community members nearby reacted not with anger, but with calm efficiency, carefully recovering each precious seed. This simple act seemed to affect the sheriff more deeply than any argument. He watched in silence as elderly hands gently gathered what could have been irreplaceable genetic material, treating each seed with reverence. After a long moment, Sheriff Miller stepped away from the group, radio in hand. James followed, overhearing his conversation with the deputies outside. "Stand down for now," Miller ordered. "The situation is complicated. No immediate threat. Maintain positions but holster weapons." When he returned, Miller addressed Marcus directly. "I need to consult with county authorities about jurisdictional issues here. This isn't as simple as I thought." Marcus nodded. "We understand. All we ask is time to present our case properly." As they prepared to return to the surface, Renee finally found a moment alone with her son. "Why didn't you contact us, Marcus? All these years, not knowing if you were alive or dead." Marcus's expression clouded with remorse. "At first I couldn't. I was badly injured when they found me, unconscious for weeks. By the time I recovered enough to think clearly, I'd learned enough about the community to understand why they remain hidden." He reached for his mother's hand. "Later, I made a choice that felt impossible. I knew you wouldn't understand unless you saw this place for yourselves, but bringing outsiders here risked everything these people have protected for generations." "And now?" Renee asked. "Will you come home with us?" Marcus looked around at the chamber where his photographs hung alongside generations of community artwork. "This is my home now, Mom, but that doesn't mean we can't be family again." Tyler joined them, his expression thoughtful. "I get it now," he said simply. "Why you stayed." The three embraced, a family fractured and now tentatively reforming around a new reality. As they made their way back toward the surface, Renee observed the sheriff deep in conversation with James and the elder, their expressions suggesting a difficult negotiation in progress. Outside, the atmosphere had transformed from hostile standoff to uneasy truce. Deputies stood in small groups, talking quietly with community members who had emerged from hiding, curiosity gradually replacing suspicion on both sides. As twilight deepened into evening, the community shared a simple meal with their unexpected visitors. The sheriff sat apart, making occasional calls on his radio and consulting with his deputies. Finally, he approached the central fire, where Marcus sat with his family. "I've spoken with the county prosecutor. There's precedent for recognizing historical claims to land use, especially for indigenous and traditional communities. It's complicated." "Most important things are," the elder replied. Before further discussion could develop, an urgent call came through on the sheriff's radio. He listened intently, his expression darkening with each passing second. "What is it?" James asked. recognizing the change in the sheriff's demeanor. Sheriff Miller's face was grim as he addressed the group. "We've got a problem. Equipment operators from Black Ridge Mining have moved into the lower valley. They're claiming they have permits to begin exploratory drilling on the eastern slope." "That's impossible," James said sharply. "That area is protected watershed. They're claiming they have state approval to bypass local restrictions," Miller replied. "Emergency economic development exemption or some such nonsense." The elder's face paled. "The eastern slope feeds the springs that supply this entire region. If they contaminate those waters..." Marcus quickly consulted a map with several community members, their expressions growing increasingly alarmed. "Their drilling site sits directly above the aquifer that feeds not just our valley, but the entire watershed that supplies drinking water to 3 counties. How did they get permits without public hearings?" Renee demanded. The sheriff's expression was cynical. "Money opens doors that should stay closed." In the sudden silence that followed, a low rumble vibrated through the cave floor, distant but unmistakable. A community member burst into the clearing, breathless with urgency. "They've started. Heavy equipment is already breaking ground on the eastern ridge." When the sheriff finally decided that there was no crime to be investigated, an alert sounded in the community's communication system. Heavy equipment was moving at the base of the mountain. A mining company had begun illegal operations in the protected area, threatening not only the secret valley, but the entire ecosystem of the region. The elder spread an intricate map across a flat boulder, her weathered finger tracing the network of underground springs that fed both the hidden valley and the surrounding region. Around her gathered an unlikely alliance: community members, law enforcement officers, and the Williams family, all united by the sudden common threat. "These aquifers," she explained, her voice carrying the gravity of generations, "connect everything. What poisons the water here will eventually reach the rivers that supply your towns downstream." Sheriff Miller studied the detailed hydrological mappings with growing concern. "These drawings are more precise than any county survey I've seen. How long have you been monitoring these water systems?" 2 centuries, replied a tattooed man who had introduced himself as the community's waterkeeper. "Each generation adds observations, notes changes. We have rainfall and flow records dating back to 1824. Miller made a frustrated call to the county offices, his voice rising as he was transferred from department to department. When he finally disconnected, his expression was grim. Black Ridge Mining somehow got an emergency resource extraction permit signed by 2 state officials. They're claiming it's temporary exploratory work, but they've already moved heavy equipment onto the site. "Those permits were obtained illegally," James stated flatly. "I know the protection status of that watershed. No state official can override federal environmental protections without extensive review." "Unless someone was paid very well to look the other way," Miller agreed, surprising the others with his cynicism. "The question is what we do about it now." Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding attention despite his youth. "We fight this together. The community has knowledge of the land that no survey can match, and you," he nodded to Miller, "have legal authority that we lack." The sheriff considered this, then nodded slowly. "I can challenge their permits on procedural grounds, force a temporary work stoppage while we investigate." "That won't be enough," the elder cautioned. "Companies like this have lawyers who delay while damage continues. We need evidence of actual environmental harm they're causing." James pulled out his satellite phone, the only electronic device that still functioned reliably in the valley. "I have contacts who can get us satellite imagery of the operation. If we can document that they've started work before completing proper environmental impact studies..." Tyler, who had been quietly examining the maps, suddenly looked up. "What about the cave systems? Do they connect to areas near their drilling site?" The waterkeeper nodded. "There's a network that runs beneath the eastern ridge. We use it to monitor water quality from the natural springs." "Then we need multiple approaches," Renee suggested. drawing on her years of experience navigating bureaucracies during her search for Marcus. Legal challenges, documentation of environmental impact, and public exposure. The group quickly divided into teams. James and several community scouts would use the hidden trails to position themselves around the mining operation, documenting violations with cameras. Sheriff Miller would return to town with 2 deputies to file emergency injunctions against the permits. Tyler volunteered to accompany community members through the cave system to collect water samples that would establish baseline measurements before contamination occurred. Marcus turned to his mother. "We need your connections to the local media. Once we have evidence, we'll need to make it public immediately." Renee nodded, mentally cataloging her contacts from years of keeping Marcus's case in the public eye. "The environmental reporter at the county paper owes me a favor, and I know people at 3 local TV stations." As the groups prepared to depart on their separate missions, a rumble vibrated through the ground beneath them, more pronounced than before. "They're using seismic charges for preliminary testing," James explained, his expression darkening. "Standard practice before drilling, but extremely dangerous in karst topography with extensive cave systems." The elder's face showed rare alarm. "If they collapse the underground rivers, we need to move now," Marcus urged, "before they cause irreversible damage." Under cover of darkness, the teams set out. James led his group through forests paths known only to the community, circling around to approach the mining operation from higher ground. Sheriff Miller and his deputies departed for town, armed with maps and preliminary documentation. Tyler followed the waterkeeper and 2 young community members into a narrow cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. The passage quickly opened into a larger tunnel, its walls smooth from centuries of flowing water. "These are limestone caves," explained the waterkeeper, his voice echoing slightly. "Formed over thousands of years by underground rivers. Extremely vulnerable to pollution and structural damage." They descended deeper, occasionally wading through crystal-clear streams that glowed in the light of their lanterns. Tyler marveled at the untouched beauty of this hidden world, understanding more fully what was at stake. Meanwhile, Marcus and Renee remained in the valley with the elder, preparing documentation that would explain the community's historical presence without exposing their current location. "We need to establish legal standing to challenge the mining operation," Renee explained, "without putting your community at risk of further intrusion." The elder nodded thoughtfully. "There are precedents in your legal system: indigenous rights, historical land use, cultural heritage preservation." Marcus spread out his extensive photographic documentation of rare plant species found nowhere else. "These alone should trigger endangered species protection protocols." As they worked through the night, a young scout returned with James's first report. The mining operation was larger than anticipated, with equipment suggesting plans for extensive excavation rather than limited exploratory work. "They're moving with unusual speed," the scout reported, "working through the night under powerful lights. James says it suggests they're trying to establish irreversible progress before legal challenges can be mounted." The elder received this news with stoic concern. "They know their permits are questionable. They aim to create a situation where stopping them becomes more complicated than allowing them to continue." By dawn, Sheriff Miller called on James's satellite phone. He had succeeded in getting a county judge to review the permits, but the process would take days, not hours. "The mining company's lawyers are already countering," he reported, "claiming economic necessity and promising jobs. They've got local politicians making statements of support." "We need more immediate leverage," Marcus concluded after the call ended. "Something that would force them to stop while the legal process unfolds." The answer arrived mid-morning, when Tyler and the water sampling team emerged from the caves with alarming news. The seismic testing had already caused minor collapses in several passages, and preliminary water samples showed increased turbidity in streams closest to the drilling site. They've barely started, and already contamination is spreading, Tyler explained, holding up vials of water collected from different locations. The progression from clear to cloudy was unmistakable. Using James's satellite phone, they coordinated with the observation team. James had managed to document clear violations of safety protocols and boundary markers, with equipment positioned directly over protected watershed areas. "We have enough to go public," Renee declared, reviewing the evidence. "With images of water contamination already occurring, we can trigger emergency environmental protection measures." She placed calls to her media contacts, arranging to meet a reporter at a location near town. Sheriff Miller agreed to provide escort, lending legitimacy to their claims. Before Renee departed with the documentation, Marcus pulled her aside. Their conversation, the first truly private moment they'd had since reuniting, began awkwardly but quickly deepened. "I never meant to hurt you and Tyler," Marcus said, his voice low. "When I first regained consciousness after being found, I was confused, injured. By the time I was well enough to fully understand what had happened, you'd found something you never had before," Renee finished for him. "I see that now." "I thought about trying to contact you," he admitted, "but the community has strict protocols about outside communication, not out of cultish control, but from hard experience. Every time they've reached out to the outside world in the past." "They've been betrayed," Renee nodded. "I understand better now. But Marcus, 5 years. We thought you were dead." Pain flashed across his features. "I know. That knowledge has been the hardest burden. I told myself that a clean break was kinder than asking you to keep impossible secrets. I was wrong." Their reconciliation was interrupted by another tremor, stronger than previous ones. From the cave entrance, Tyler emerged with the waterkeeper, both looking grim. "The seismic charges are getting closer to the main aquifer," the waterkeeper reported. "If they collapse that passage, the entire underground river system could be diverted or contaminated." Marcus studied the maps again. "We need to stop them immediately, before they reach this point." He indicated a critical juncture in the cave system, directly beneath the mining company's current position. Tyler suggested documenting the rare species living in the caves: blind fish, specialized insects, and unique microbial colonies that would automatically trigger endangered species protections. Working quickly, they gathered samples and photographs, adding them to the documentation Renee would take to the media. "Be careful," Marcus told his mother as she prepared to leave with Sheriff Miller. "Black Ridge Mining has powerful allies. They won't appreciate being exposed." Renee squared her shoulders, a determination in her stance that Marcus recognized from his childhood, the unmistakable resolution of a mother protecting what she loved. "They haven't dealt with me before." While Renee departed for town, James was implementing his own strategy. Using his military contacts, he managed to reach a former colleague, now working with federal land management. Within hours, satellite images confirmed the mining operation had encroached on federally protected land, not just state-regulated areas. "This changes everything," James explained, when he returned to the valley to coordinate their next steps. "Federal jurisdiction supersedes the state permits they obtained." As the day progressed, their impromptu coalition refined its approach. The community's knowledge of the mountain, combined with James's strategic thinking, Sheriff Miller's local authority, and the Williams family's determination, created a formidable opposition to the mining operation. By nightfall, Renee had successfully delivered the evidence to media outlets and environmental authorities. The first news reports were already airing, showing images of contaminated water samples and equipment operating in clearly marked protected areas. The community gathered around a small radio, listening to the initial coverage with a mixture of hope and apprehension. For people who had survived by remaining invisible, public attention brought its own dangers. "What happens after we stop the mining operation?" Tyler asked the elder, as they listened to a reporter describing the anonymous environmental watchdogs who had exposed the violations. "We will adapt," she replied simply, "as we always have." Marcus rejoined them after helping to evacuate the most vulnerable community members to safer locations further from the mining activity. The company's stock price is already dropping with the news coverage. Their investors won't tolerate a public environmental scandal. Just as it seemed their strategy was working, James burst into the gathering, his expression urgent. "New seismic readings from the monitoring stations. They've increased the charges, trying to accelerate their work before being forced to stop." As he spoke, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. No mere tremor, but a sustained quake that sent dust raining from the cave ceiling. In the moment they were finalizing the preparations to expose the mining company, a sudden tremor shook the mountain. The illegal operations had caused a collapse that threatened both the mining camp and the community's cave system, forcing everyone to immediate action to prevent tragedy. The cave floor bucked beneath them like a living thing, sending everyone staggering. Dust and small rocks rained from the ceiling as the tremor intensified, the rumble building to a deafening roar. "Everyone out!" Marcus shouted, helping the elder toward the main exit. "Head for the surface!" Community members moved with practiced efficiency, despite their fear, guiding children and elders toward escape routes. Years of drills for exactly this scenario were paying off. There was urgency, but not panic. Tyler grabbed a support beam as another violent shake threatened his balance. The mining charges must have hit a fault line. James was already on his satellite phone, shouting to be heard over the rumbling. "We've got a situation. Major seismic event at the Black Ridge site. Likely cave collapse. Possible workers trapped. Need emergency services immediately." Outside the cave entrance, they regrouped in the valley. The quaking had subsided to intermittent tremors, but a plume of dust rose from the eastern ridge where the mining operation was located. "The main aquifer chamber must have collapsed," the waterkeeper said, his face ashen. If workers were directly above that section, Marcus made a quick decision. "We need to help them, not just for their sake. If anyone dies, the authorities will swarm this entire mountain." The elder nodded grimly. "Marcus is right. We know these caves better than anyone. We may be the only chance those workers have." Sheriff Miller, who had returned from town just before the collapse, took charge of coordinating with emergency services on his radio. "I'm getting reports of at least 6 workers unaccounted for. Rescue teams are mobilizing, but they're at least an hour out." "We don't have an hour," James said, studying the map spread on a boulder. "If the main collapse is here," he pointed to a section of the eastern ridge, "they could be trapped with rising water or limited air." Marcus quickly organized community members into rescue teams. "We'll need the emergency medical supplies, all the rope we have, and the cave diving equipment." Renee watched her son with a mixture of pride and fear. In that moment, he was neither the lost 15-year-old of her memory, nor the stranger who had chosen a hidden life. He was simply a leader doing what needed to be done. "I'm coming with you," she said, as he prepared to depart. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close to me. The passages will be unfamiliar even to us if there's been significant collapse." Tyler joined them, equipment bag already slung over his shoulder. "I'm the smallest one here. If there are tight spaces to navigate..." There was no time to argue. 3 teams set out toward the eastern ridge, one taking the surface route to approach from above, the others entering the cave system to navigate from below. Marcus led his team, including Renee and Tyler, through a series of tunnels that would bring them closest to the likely location of trapped workers. The familiar passages soon gave way to distorted terrain, fresh cracks in walls, debris blocking sections that had been clear for generations. "The water's rising," Tyler observed as they splashed through a tunnel that should have been merely damp. The collapse must have diverted an underground stream. They pressed forward, using hand signals when the roar of water made conversation impossible. After nearly 40 minutes of careful navigation, they heard it. faint but unmistakable. Human voices calling for help. "There!" Marcus pointed toward a fissure that hadn't existed before the collapse. "That's not one of our passages. It must connect to where they were drilling." The opening was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Tyler immediately volunteered. "I can fit. Let me go first with the emergency beacon." Marcus reluctantly agreed, helping secure a safety line to Tyler's harness. "3 tugs if you need us to pull you back. Continuous tugs if you've found survivors." Tyler nodded, took a deep breath, and slithered into the narrow passage. For several agonizing minutes, there was nothing but the sound of distant water and occasional falling debris. Then the rope went taut with a series of quick, continuous pulls. "He's found them!" Renee gasped. Marcus called into the passage. "Tyler, can you hear me?" His brother's voice came back faintly. "3 workers, 1 badly injured. The space opens up on this side, but there's water rising fast." The next hour was a blur of coordinated rescue efforts. The passage was carefully widened to allow medical supplies through, then expanded further using tools brought by James's team, who had connected with them via the community's internal communication system. Sheriff Miller coordinated from above, where the surface team had located the drill site. Emergency services had arrived and were attempting to lower equipment from above, but the unstable ground made their efforts dangerous. The rescue took on greater urgency when Tyler reported the water level rising more rapidly. Whatever was blocking the diverted stream must have given way, he called through the widened passage. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before this chamber is underwater." Marcus made a split-second decision. "We're not waiting. Sheriff, tell your people to clear the surface operation. We're bringing them out through our way." The first worker emerged, a young woman, muddy and bloodied but able to move under her own power with assistance. Next came a middle-aged man, his hard hat missing and a nasty gash across his forehead. The third worker presented the greatest challenge, an older man with what appeared to be a broken leg and possible internal injuries. Moving him through the narrow, winding passages would be difficult and dangerous. "We'll need a stretcher," Marcus said, but there was no time to fashion one properly. Renee stripped off her jacket. "Use this and branches from our packs. We can improvise." Working together, they created a makeshift carrying sling. The injured man groaned in pain despite their care as they secured him. "Water's at chest level now," Tyler called, the last to remain with the injured worker. "We need to move." The return journey was harrowing. What had been merely wet passages before were now flowing streams. Twice they had to find alternate routes when their planned path proved impassable due to new collapses. Above ground, the situation was equally tense. The mining company executives had arrived along with state officials and a growing media presence attracted by the emergency and Renee's earlier environmental exposé. When Marcus's team finally emerged into the valley with the rescued workers, they were met by emergency medical technicians who had been guided in by Sheriff Miller. As paramedics took over care of the injured, Marcus pulled his team back toward the community's more concealed areas. "We need to maintain distance now," he whispered to his mother and brother. "Too many cameras, too many officials." But it was too late for complete anonymity. A local reporter had already spotted Renee, recognizing her from years of interviews about her missing son. "Ms. Williams," she called, hurrying over with a cameraman in tow. "Is it true you were part of the rescue team? And is that—" Her eyes widened as she recognized Marcus, his features still familiar despite the passing years. Oh my God. Marcus Williams. Before they could retreat, they were surrounded by cameras and officials. The mining company's chief operations officer pushed forward, his expensive suit incongruous against the muddy, chaotic backdrop. "We want to express our deepest gratitude to the rescuers," he began smoothly, clearly prepared to control the narrative. "This unfortunate accident—" "This was no accident," James interrupted, stepping forward with his satellite phone displaying images taken earlier. Your operation was using charges far exceeding permitted levels in a protected watershed area, despite being warned about the cave systems below. The executive's practiced smile faltered. I'm sure you're mistaken about the technical details. 3 counties get their drinking water from the aquifer you just damaged, Marcus stated, finding himself suddenly the focus of multiple cameras. This isn't just about your workers or our mountain. This is about the water supply for over 50,000 people. As if on cue, the waterkeeper emerged from another cave entrance, holding sample jars filled with visibly contaminated water. These were taken from springs 5 miles downstream just minutes ago. The contamination is already spreading. The media frenzy intensified, with reporters firing questions from all directions. Through it all, Marcus stood firm, answering clearly and knowledgeably about the mountain's hydrology and ecosystem. Beside him, Renee watched with a mother's complex pride, seeing her son fully in his element, using his knowledge to defend something precious. 3 days later, the immediate crisis had passed, but its repercussions were just beginning. The valley had become the site of an unusual gathering. Representatives from the community, state and federal environmental officials, mining company executives, and conservation organizations. They met in a neutral location, a meadow at the edge of the valley far enough from the community's central living areas to protect their privacy. Marcus had spent hours consulting with the elder and other community leaders, crafting a proposal that might protect both their way of life and the mountain itself. What we're suggesting, Marcus explained to the assembled group, is a formal conservation partnership. The community would serve as stewards for this ecosystem, sharing selective knowledge about sustainable management while maintaining our traditional lifeways. A federal official frowned. You're asking for legal recognition of your community's right to occupy protected federal land. That's unprecedented. Actually, it's not, James countered, producing documents from his research. There are multiple precedents for indigenous and traditional communities maintaining stewardship of public lands. What's unique here is the depth of knowledge this community brings. Botanical, hydrological, and ecological expertise developed over generations. The mining company representatives remained opposed, but their position had been fatally weakened by the public relations disaster of the collapse and the irrefutable evidence of environmental violations. State officials, initially hesitant, became more receptive when presented with the community's detailed historical records of water quality and forest management. Tyler, who had become an unexpected bridge between worlds, helped translate the community's complex knowledge systems into terms the officials could understand and value. What they're offering is a living laboratory of sustainable practices, he explained. Knowledge that could help address climate resilience across the entire region. After 3 days of negotiation, a preliminary agreement was reached. The community would receive legal protection for their traditional territory within the national forest in exchange for serving as environmental monitors and sharing specific aspects of their knowledge through controlled research partnerships. 3 months later, Renee helped organize a small exhibition at a local gallery in town. Echoes in the Mountain, the work of Marcus Williams. The displayed photographs represented a carefully curated selection that Marcus had permitted to be shared with the outside world. The opening night brought together an unlikely mix of attendees. Community members, disguised in modern clothing, mingled with environmental activists, local officials, and art lovers. James, newly appointed as Cultural Preservation Director for the National Park, watched Renee as she guided visitors through her son's work. "Do you miss him?" he asked quietly when they had a moment alone. Renee considered the question, her eyes on a particularly moving photograph of community elders teaching children to identify medicinal plants. "Every day," she replied, "but not like before. Now it's more like when your child goes away to college. He's found his purpose." At the far end of the gallery hung the final photograph of the exhibition. It showed Marcus from behind, wearing his father's red jacket, standing on a hilltop at sunrise. Beneath the image was a simple caption that had been carefully discussed and approved by both Marcus and the community elder. Some people get lost in order to find themselves.